Good morning, everyone. Richard here at Calvin Wazoo. And yes, I am recording a video here in the morning, having my coffee. I'm doing this so that I can have this done before I start work. I still have to work. Retirement's close, very close. But anyway, I am up to, gosh, what is it here? It is question number 9 for Robert Z2's lottery. And this is one that we talk about our favorite artist of all time. And not our favorites, but, pick one. And it's kind of an interesting response I'm going to give, because part of it was, to tell stories and, do you have a lot of different memorabilia? And I do, for one particular artist. And it is also the particular artist that I have the most content of. And he is a favorite, but I can't say that I have one absolute favorite above all others. I mean, there are some brand new bands that I am already thinking I am going to get everything that I can by them. But I don't have the stories that can go along with, even with these new ones, with the newer ones that I do have with this one. And, I think most people will probably know based on, the name of my channel. And that is, Frank Zappa. He's not my favorite above all other people. He is one of my favorites. But clearly, when it comes to how much media I own of his and related to him, it's second place is not even close. So yeah, Frank Zappa. In fact, oh, you know what? I pulled the wrong record. I'll go here. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, now I got the record. Frank Zappa was something that over time I came to understand and appreciate his musical composition and his arranging genius much later than I became infatuated with his music. And I guess I really got hooked in Zappa probably in my teens, but it was not the first time I ever heard him. My brother had this record here. Now this is a reissue. I have the original stereo and the original mono version, also of Absolutely Free. But this is the remastered reissue that Zappa Records released. Absolutely Free, the second recording of the Mothers of Invention. And I was maybe, I think it was released in 1968, and I was, 10 years old at the time. When I actually heard it, it could have been in 1968, maybe 1969. Regardless, I remember my brother had it, and I listened to it. I was mesmerized, blown away. It was like, yeah, the Beatles, I mean, they're great. But, there was also, the Monkees. Those were probably the only two other bands that I was super familiar with at the time. I mean, I had heard the Rolling Stones, because again, mostly because of my brother. I had a sister who also had um, records, but they were definitely a different genre. That's how I grew to love artists like Sarah Vaughan and other jazz soloists. And of course, my mother had a pretty extensive record collection of both classical and also modern contemporary. Um, but listening to this, being like 10 years old, and how everything kind of just went into each other, the songs, there I could recognize that something was going on that struck me as not only being really entertaining and really interesting, but I also sensed it was pretty important. The message that was going through, I mean, some of it was pretty easy for me, my 10-year-old mind to pick up. The idea of plastic people, and how people, Americans in particular, lead fake lives, and their desires and wants are so absurd that they wind up doing really awful things. I mean, my favorite song to this day is still from this album, Brown Shoes Don't Make It. And, Brown Shoes Don't Make It is a pretty depraved song. At least the character that is being sung about in that song is a depraved person, a local politician, City Hall Fred. But a lot of the other things that were going on in the record, I really didn't, comprehend until much later. But nonetheless, that was probably the first time I had ever heard Frank Zappa. Well, then in my teens, there were the Flo and Eddie years. And, as a 14-year-old with a depraved mind, yeah, I and my friends, we really, really enjoyed the albums like Just Another Band from LA, Fillmore East, 200 Motels. These were all really great albums in my mind. Now, as I got older, that era of Frank diminished. I don't really, it's not my favorite era. And, I still enjoy some of the material, but there's some very, very problematic material, that was released at that time. I mean, the whole sequence on the Fillmore East, Do You Like My New Car, is, I can't remember if it was Flo or Eddie. It was either Mark Volman or, now I'm drawing a blank. Howard Kalin. Yeah, it was either Howard or Mark who was, this, because that sequence in that song is based on a true story in which either Howard or Mark, I think it might have been Mark Volman, hooked up with an underage girl. And that's what the song is about. And there's documentation in which he was saying that, yeah, she was I didn't know exactly what her age was, but I know she wasn't 17. And so wherever it happened, depending on what state they were in at the time, it could have very well been statutory rape. And it's immortalized in a song. So there are times when, but then there are other songs too, like Magdalena, that a lot of people, the ick factor with them and Magdalena, really goes up. But that's a completely fictitious song, for one thing. And I do think it's funny because, again, I mean, and Frank did this a lot. He took the bizarre obsessions, particularly sexual obsessions of other people, and just kind of blew out the doors and turned them into songs that were not regaling these actions, but just were exposing them for what they are. And I think some people think that, well, Frank's a complicated person. That's another thing I learned over the years. He was a very complicated man. As an individual, as a musician, as a composer, as a band leader, very complicated. He was not a simple character. He was a very complex person. And like all complex person, there are parts of him that you recognize as being brilliant and you praise. And then there are parts of him that are dark and icky and ugly. So I guess the more I started learning about Frank Zappa, the more I became fascinated with him as a person and him as a musician. I mean, all these different aspects of the same guy. So that's why I started collecting so much about him, was he really, truly interested me. And I like the music. Don't get me wrong. I love the music. But it's not like, even though he's the largest part of my collection, I have many books about him. I've got, this is probably the best resource I have about him, because it goes through and talks about every single album, track by track, who is on them, the history associated with each song. A fantastic book. I have, besides his autobiography, and I have several other biographies, and as a writer myself and a journalist, autobiographies are great, but they're really not the last word, okay? Just because it's in the autobiography doesn't mean an event being described in it happened the way it's being described. We do this, all of us, we all tell things. Our memory is very fallible. In fact, in my journalism work, I learned that eyewitness testimony in a trial is the most unreliable testimony. That's why you have to bring in more than one eyewitness, because each witness sees the same event differently and they remember different parts of it. Plus, over time, they embellish their own memory without realizing it. Frank Zappa did that. The famous one is the Amougis Festival in Belgium, where he was, I guess, like hired to be like the MC and the promoter and organizer or whatever. It was a music festival in a turnip field in Belgium. And Frank, there was a film made that was aired on French television. I think there's a copy of it circulating someplace. I have not seen it, although I have seen little snippets of that film show up on YouTube from time to time, and then it disappears. But anyway, that's where Frank met Ainsley Dunbar, the drummer, who then joined Zappa's band. Now, Zappa went there as an MC. He did not have any instruments with him. He did not bring his guitars. So, but there are recordings of him playing with Pink Floyd, in particular, jamming during, I think it was Interstellar Overdrive. And I believe also he jammed with the band Caravan. I don't think he did with Captain Beefheart, but Captain Beefheart was there as well. But Frank denies that he played with Pink Floyd. But there's video showing that he did. And I have a hard drive, external hard drive of a lot of bootleg material, and I have on there a recording from Amuji's. And while of course it's just a recording, and has no liner notes or any kind of documentation to verify whatever, I hear Frank Zappa playing with Pink Floyd. There's no mistaking Frank Zappa's guitar playing style. When you hear it, you know it's him. So, and yet in his autobiography, the real Frank Zappa book, he denies that. The way he remembers certain things are contradictory to other people's memory. So yeah, it's not like it was a deliberate lie or anything like that. It's just that we don't, we think the way we remember things is the way things happen, and that's not always the case, The first concert I ever went to was a Frank Zappa concert. And I had to look up everything about it, because I couldn't remember. I saved the ticket stub, but I've lost it. I have no idea where the ticket stub is. But the concert was on April 28th, 1974. So I was 15 years old at the time. And it was in Big Rapids, Michigan at the Field House, the basketball arena or whatever. Saw quite a few concerts there. I think it was called Finch Field House, and it was Ferris State College at the time. It's now Ferris State University, and I lived like maybe 15 miles away in a rural area. Okay, I was 15. I couldn't drive by myself yet. So my parents, I believe it was my father, took me to the show, dropped me off, and then we estimated how long the show was going to last, and then I was to meet him after the show to be picked up. And because the show was still going on, it was towards the end of the show, but it was still going on when the time came that I needed to leave and be picked up. So yeah, that was the first time I ever saw Frank Zappa, and it was the first rock concert that I had ever gone to. And then in the subsequent years, I saw him 3 more times. And that's really it. A lot of people talk about, I've seen the Grateful Dead 30 times. I've seen the Rolling Stones, 15 times. I've seen Led Zeppelin 8 times. Frank Zappa, I've seen a total of 4 times. And that one time in 1974. And then the other time was in the early 1980s. The first I was at the University of Arizona in Tucson, and he had a show scheduled, but it quickly sold out, and I couldn't get a ticket. But because it sold out so quickly, they put in a late show. So there was an early show, which I was unable to go to, but I got a ticket to the late show. And this was in Centennial Hall on campus, which is a pretty nice hall. So it's reserved, it was reserved seating. And each time that I went, I got pretty good seats. So in 1980, I saw the one show. That was October 10th, 1980. Then the following year, he came back. Again at Centennial Hall, 2 shows. And I got tickets to both shows on October 9th, 1981. Now, a weird story happened during one of those shows. See, this is the memory thing. I can't quite remember what was going on. And the deal is, at some point during the show, I can't remember, I think it was the late show. And some point during the show, gosh, this is 20 minutes already. But anyway, during the show, John Smothers, who was Frank's bodyguard, came out on stage, whispered, and it was while Frank was soloing, whispered something into his ear. Frank stopped soloing, put his guitar down, and went off stage. Didn't say anything to the rest of the band. And the band kept playing, but you could tell they didn't know what was going on. And of course, all of us inside the show didn't know what was going on. And that went on for, oh gosh, 3 or 4 minutes, maybe. And then Frank came back out. Now, I don't know who announced. See, I can't remember if it was announced during the show, why that happened, or if Frank came back out and just went on with the show, and then it was something in the paper the next day that explained what happened. But as I recall, and if you were there, all right, October 9th, 1981, Centennial Hall, one of the shows in Tucson, Arizona. The story that evolved is somebody went on the tour bus, unauthorized person went on the tour bus, or a bus, and took Frank Zappa's gun. Zappa had a pistol. And so, which kind of, again, that story doesn't quite make sense, because Frank Zappa didn't ride the tour bus with the other musicians, as I remember. At least most of the time that was the situation. But anyway, that was what the whole thing was about. So I don't remember. I don't remember, and it's hard to look up old, articles about some of this stuff, because a lot of it, at one time you could find it searching in Google, but then it disappears when a site changes and redesigns their site. They don't carry over 100% of their archived material, so material over time gets lost. And that's why hard copy documentation is far superior to internet documentation. But anyway, those were the other times that I saw Frank Zappa. Yeah, I probably need to wrap this up. I never met him. I did meet several of the band members. They were playing, Ray White and Ike Willis and some others for a while toured as a band called Project Object, which was a term that Frank coined to explain how all his material is related. So they were playing in this bar here in Chicago, and I went to see. And so I picked up, they had this book for sale, which is a very good resource. And got them to sign it. So you can see there's Ray White's signature. He signed it in front of me, and then he took the book into the back. It was during a break, and then got the other members of the band to sign. So I got signatures on here. So we've got Ike Willis, Napoleon Murphy Brock. He was playing with them at that time, and some of these other signatures, I got no idea who are they. Andre Chomandale was playing with them, and he signed the book. God, who is that? I have no idea what that signature, that signature is. I have no idea. I can't remember what that signature is. That, believe it or not, that is Napoleon Murphy Brock's signature. But yeah, some of these others, I can't figure out who the hell they are. But anyway, got that. I got, sometimes I pick up Japanese pressings. I have, let me pick this up, and you can see behind me here. So this is an alternative cover. All right, for Chunga's Revenge. Chunga's Revenge cover is normally red. This is kind of an olive color. So this is a variant on the cover that was released in Great Britain. So this was, an oddity that I found. And the other oddity cover, I mean, if you remember the album Weasels Rip My Flesh, it's got that crazy Neon Park cover with I should have pulled that record, but I didn't. What I pulled was this variant. This is a variant of that cover that was released in Germany because for some reason, well, hell, I might as well pull that one out too. For some reason, they thought this cover was too risque. Okay? I mean, it's a pretty graphic cover. I mean, with the razor and the, okay? Weasels Rip My Flesh. So they came up with this one. I mean, to me, this one is even more macabre. And of course, when something like this happens, even though it's on a reprise, this is the German pressing, even though something like this happens, it's an unauthorized cover. What got me to also, really intrigued with the music, at the time, there was, at the time of the Flo and Eddie years, I was, 13, 14, 15 years old at the time. And, the friends and I, we all, loved this material, and we were buying it when it was being released. And then I saw it. Now, I didn't see this one. This is the Japanese pressing. I have three copies of this record, including the original. And when I saw it in the store, I was thinking, wow, cool. This is Frank Zappa. I want to get it. And I took it home and listened to it, and I was like blown away by this record. It was amazing. The whole jazz fusion thing that was going on at that time. And I had acquired a couple of earlier records. Burnt Weenie Sandwich it's tough to pick my favorite Zappa record of all time. And it vacillates between Burnt Weenie Sandwich and One Size Fits All. But anyway, I was familiar with Burnt Weenie Sandwich at that time, and it was my favorite Zappa record. But my friends, they liked the comedy music. So when I played Waka Jawaka for them, they didn't like it. Now, the interesting thing, though, is I was a musician at that time. At 13, 14, I was playing saxophone, so I was in the school band. And so I had been exposed to a lot of different types of music. And while I really don't know anything about music theory and all that kind of thing, nonetheless, some of that was covered in the public school curriculum when you were in band. So I appreciate, this is a brilliant album. It's just, there's no doubt about it. It is a brilliant freaking album. But yeah, my friends didn't like it because it's not comedy, and I guess that's also when I started to really recognize the breadth of Zappa's genius. And there's some other, memorabilia I have. Freak Out had this thing where you could get a map of, all the Freak Out locations. And it's funny because I see people selling, like, they say it's an original copy of Freak Out with the map. No, the map didn't come with the record. You bought the record and you mailed in to get the map. So if they have a real map, it was not one that came with the record. So it could have easily come from some other source and then, just put it together. So it's cool, to have an original map because nobody really took that offer that seriously at the time. And they typically did not get kept with the record because they did not come together. I have a copy it's a facsimile of the Freak Out map, which someday I'll frame. So, little things, about that. And I don't have anything that was autographed by Frank. I remember Lumpy Gravy is a great, 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 great album. And I still don't have an OG of that one. I have an OG pressing from Great Britain, but I don't have the original one on the Blue Verve label. But anyway, with Lumpy Gravy, I remember seeing on eBay that somebody had one for sale that was inscribed by Frank because it used to belong to, I think, according to the seller, it used to belong to their uncle who was a musician with the Arbuncle, I can't remember how you pronounce it, orchestra. And Frank gave him a copy, or he inscribed his copy of Lumpy Gravy. So it says to so-and-so, blah, 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 Frank Zappa. I didn't try to buy that because the provenance to me was sketchy. Anybody, I had no idea what Frank Zappa's signature looked like. And unlike other things that I have bought, particularly books that are autographed by the author, there's usually some type of certification that comes with it to show the provenance that, yes, the author did sign this copy. And it was just somebody's word on eBay that Frank signed this. But yeah. Wow, this went well. I don't know if I told any decent stories, about Frank Zappa, but I guess, yeah, he qualifies as the musical artist that I am probably the most obsessed with. I'm still looking for material by him. I have a vinyl OG copy of almost everything up to... Well, Baby Snakes is the first one where I only have a CD. I don't have any vinyl copy of Baby Snakes. But I still don't have an OG copy of Reuben and the Jets. And as I just mentioned, I do not have an OG copy of Lumpy Gravy. So of the earlier records, I have OGs of everything plus the reissues and some other variants. And of course, all the different CDs. I even did a video about the connection Frank Zappa had with Johnny Crawford. So yeah, just a fascinating, and not only just about him, but all the musicians that played with him. I mean, I did a video, every once in a while I've done these videos called Genealogy of Music. I did one about Jim Gordon, the drummer, a drummer who was with Frank Zappa for a while, but also all the other people that Jim Gordon played with, and his tragic story because he ended up going to prison for murdering his mother with a hammer. So yeah, I mean, as this is kind of happens like when you get old, how suddenly things you start to remember and they come back to you about these things. But this has been going on for 36 minutes, and if you watched all the way through, thank you. I really don't think I'm all that interesting, but some people sometimes do. And remember that you can find me on Instagram at NewsDude76. That's NEWZDUDE76. And also on Facebook, I have a Facebook page called Kelvin Wazoo. Leave a comment in the Down Under. Would share your Frank Zappa stories, especially if you were at that show in Tucson. So if you have any other information about what happened. And remember to pray for the people inside your head, for they won't be there when you're dead.